Okay, thanks. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the North of Tyne Combined Authority Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on Tuesday, the 13th of October via virtual means due to the current COVID restrictions in place for local authority meetings. And I'll move on to formal business of welcome and introductions. And before we do that, I've just got some announcements in terms of committee memberships. We've got members will note that we've got Councillor Stephen Fairley from Newcastle City Council now as a permanent full member of this committee. And we have Councillor Trevor Sessford from Northumberland County Council, who is replacing Councillor Richard Dodd as a substitute member due to Councillor Richard Dodd now being a cabinet member representing Northumberland, along with Councillor Glenn Sanderson and Councillor Richard Wearmouth being a substitute for that. So my name's Councillor Ruffhead and I chair this committee. I'm a member of Northumberland County Council and represent the Berwick-upon-Tweed area on my home authority. And just going through the list of members present, it's probably easier if I just shout your name out and you say present or however you wish to address. So this morning we've got Councillor Gordon Stewart.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Anita Lowett.
Yes, Chair.
And we've got Councillor Liz Dunn acting as a substitute for Councillor Susan Dungworth this morning.
Yes, Chair.
And we've got Councillor Peter Early and Councillor Margaret Hall.
Good morning.
And I believe in terms of apologies this morning, and I'm sure a Democratic Service Officer will correct me, we've got Councillor Susan Dungworth and Councillor Linda Wright, the Vice Chair. Apologies submitted. And that takes us on to item 3. Any declarations of interest from members this morning? No, I can't see any hands. So item 4, to agree the minutes of our committee meeting held on the 30th of June. Now, members have had these in advance of the meeting. Is that a member's just happy for these to be signed as a true record?
Yes, Chair, but I have some matters arising.
Yeah. Okay. Just before we go into that, the only thing I've got is on page 6, where we were talking about with the mayoral update. I think there's been a little bit of confusion around one of the committee members' questions to the mayor about the position of deputy mayor, of where there was confusion of someone thinking it was a civic role. I think that question was asked by a member of this committee in relation to that it is written in some combined authority constitutions that the cabinet portfolio of deputy mayor rotate amongst constituent authorities and other combined authorities. So it was queried whether that be the case, whereas it seems to have been picked up that people thought it was a civic deputy mayor rotation, whereas it was the portfolio position of deputy mayor of a combined authority rotation around. That was the only thing that I had. And Councillor Lowett?
Yes, Chair, just a couple of things. On page 4 under item 61, at the bottom of one of the bullet points, I asked about collaboration work and I made a request for a heat map to identify who benefited from funding. What I got was a map with the 3 civic buildings for North Tyneside, Newcastle and Northumberland on it. I was hoping that we would get a little bit more detail than that, and it would be very interesting to see what, where it actually went, where it ended up, rather than just distributed to the council.
Yeah.
The other one was on 62 about the mayor's first year in office. And at the bottom of page 5, one bullet point up, it just said delivery of jobs and things. And we were told that some of the jobs, there were another 180 jobs had been signed off, but at the time of the meeting were confidential. And I just wondered if we could have an update on that sometime. Sorry, and the final one was, I've been busy as here, I've got nothing to do at home. The committee announced, it's on number 62 again, but at the very end, just before 63 on page 7, it says that there was £25 million of funding to be available to North of Tyne for housing delivery on brownfield sites. And I've asked for an update on that, but I still haven't had anything come through, if that's okay.
Henry, do you, as those questions predominantly came up during your presentation on the COVID recovery at the last meeting, do you have a response in terms of the heat map and the other points raised by Councillor Lau?
Chair, if it's okay with you, each of these 3 points that we can provide more detail than the council currently has. If you allow me to work with Liz to bring that back to the committee, that's probably the best way to do that, rather than me going through all of them now. Is that okay for now?
I would say that's happy if members are happy with that, for the detail to come back at a future meeting or via direct communication with members. And
Chair, can I ask if maybe if the information could be circulated before the next meeting, because they are quite far apart. It would be good to see what's actually in progress in case we want to ask questions at the next meeting.
And that was what I was about to go on and say, that
Yeah,
come back to the next meeting, but that the information be shared with members, if possible, before the next meeting via direct means, via email. And if it was felt necessary, that we could arrange an online briefing workshop type session to go through the detail ahead of it coming back to a future meeting. If that was felt needed, I'm happy for that to be organised via Henry as well. Okay, so subject to those 3 issues and the one I raised, the members happy that the minutes are a true record of the last meeting? Yeah, self-sign those when able to. And now that takes us on to item 5, COVID-19 response and recovery proposals. And then this morning we've got in attendance Dr. Henry Kippen, our Director of Economic Growth, who I believe has got a presentation attached to his report to give this morning.
I'm sure, Chair, are going to get fed up with my presentations over the next few months, because COVID recovery is going to take a while by the looks of things. So there's 2 things here. I'll go through a presentation in a moment, which relates to specifically to the recovery proposals that via Mayor and Cabinet we submitted to government. That will give the committee a good overview of the things we are asking for as a combined authority. But there's also a paper that I submitted, and I just wanted to pick out a couple of points on that before I go through the presentation, if that's all right, Chair.
Yeah.
And that's really to emphasise as much what we're not as what we are, if you like. I wouldn't want to give the impression that the combined authority is anything other than one player in a whole system of organisations and individuals who are rolling in to support post-COVID recovery. So in the paper I've pulled out just a couple of points which I think is worth restating. First is exactly that point. We know that in many areas we are playing a supporting role to frontline organisations that have had to do a lot in terms of bringing forward capacity, resources, and kind of energy to support the immediate impacts of COVID. The region as a whole, both in terms of the wider northeast, if you think about that as a 7 local authority region, and also within the Northumbria LRF area, obviously has stood up the appropriate mechanisms, both in terms of response and recovery. So we have a strategic coordination group, a recovery coordination group, which are ongoing, and of course we play a role in those, but are not necessarily leading. And then the other thing to emphasise, which you would expect me to say, is the link between where we need to be on recovery and what the combined authority has said it's going to do already, in terms of many of our programs of work, specifically on areas like clean growth, on employability and inclusion, on skills, on digital, are really incredibly relevant to where we need to be post-COVID. And if we look at the spread of recovery proposals across the country, many of them emphasise now things that we already have as key facets of what the combined authority is here to do. So I hope you would see some alignment between what we've already said we're going to do and are getting on with, and what's going to be relevant to recovery. In terms of the specific things that we are doing, I pick out under point 2 in the paper, I pick out a few. Obviously, the recovery planning that we'll go into, and kind of really playing as active as possible a role, not only within North of Tyne, but across the region as a whole, because we understand the interdependency of recovery. You know, this is it doesn't stop at the river, whichever direction you start from. And then what I've detailed is a number of specific things, some of which you're well aware of as a committee. The COVID response fund, the funding that we brought forward to address a digital divide insofar as was possible, and some of the things that have happened over the last month or so via the cabinet, which have been about making sure we do as much as possible to maximise the government support coming through. Because as you know, this is a incredibly, what's the phrase, moving feast. You know, every week we have a new raft of not only kind of communications. I don't want to second guess any of that, but also measures to support the economy. And obviously it's our job to take stock of that and make sure that we're adding value and we're not duplicating, and where it's possible we're trying to maximize the impact. So the paper goes through some of those. I'd be happy to pick up any comments from members afterwards, but if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll go on to the presentation now. So what you've got in front of us here, and hopefully people can see it on the screen, is a few short slides which outlines a much more detailed piece of work, which has come from a number of months, I would say, of work across Cabinet with stakeholders, building on the programmes of work we've got already, and of course a degree of negotiation with Whitehall, insofar as possible. Anyway, I'm going to précis that here. The larger version of this document was submitted to government and is not a public document. So what we shared publicly, what was shared publicly post Cabinet, is a shorter version of a wider report, which necessarily includes lots of detail and things that we would like, and probably more detail than any member of the public would care to read. So I'm just going to go through the top lines, and again, happy to take questions. In terms of the context that this is all in, I mean, I'm telling you things you already know here, but obviously we're talking about a changing COVID picture, just changing quickly. Characterising this wave is a range of localised regulations and guidance, and you'll have seen the PM's announcement yesterday about the 3-tier system, which of course was announced after me doing this putting this presentation together. But all of that within the region is characterised by strong cross-regional collaboration at a political level and also at an officer level, and I'm sure colleagues on the call would be able to substantiate that in different ways, but we think as a combined authority it's really important that we are very much part of that. Secondly, an evolving economic context. I've noted here that the post-furlough impact is still emerging and the economic recovery remains fragile, which is a short sentence but carrying a lot of weight, I think. I mean, we know something of the impact of the end of the furlough scheme, but I think there's more to come in terms of us understanding the unemployment effect, potentially understanding the degree of resources going to be needed to help people match skills to jobs and do that as quickly as possible. And you know, we always thought this wasn't a V-shaped recovery, and I think that's even more certain now that we're in for a bumpy time in terms of having to adapt to waves, and the relationship between the economic performance of the region and the kind of health and safety and security of the population is obviously really quite key. Thirdly, we taking stock of ongoing risks of what I've called concurrence here, which is what you get, I guess, if you put together a second wave, or the impacts of that, the economic uncertainty we've just talked about, and we know that Brexit's coming down the line too. So in terms of the region's kind of risk awareness and ability to adapt to that, we're doing quite a lot to try and understand what that might mean. And of course, within our recovery coordination group across the whole region, that's a big part of what we're trying to work through as a set of public service leaders. And then I'd pick out the opportunities for positive change. They are real. We talked in the first instance about how we might use the crisis as a moment of accelerating towards the things that the Cabinet have set out as their really key important areas. Clean growth in particular is a really important one. Shift to the digital economy, areas where we could make sure that what we do in the future is fairer than how we've worked in the past. And I still think that those are really relevant as areas we can build on. And you'll see that reflected in the piece. Next slide, please, Paul. So what we've done effectively is submit recovery proposals, which to my mind, well, certainly they absolutely call for a cleaner, more inclusive recovery, but most importantly, they call for a scale of investment and devolution to match the scale of the impact that we've seen. So they are, if you look, for example, at the Norfolk Tyne proposition, we'll come to this in a moment, but there's around 1.1 billion worth of schemes and investment in there. For the region more widely, it's 2.3. So we're talking about proposals that are really quite substantial. Now, none of that means these will necessarily come true. These are things we're putting on the table. They're not a done deal, but it just shows the scale of the ambition in terms of what we think we need to recover properly. Next slide, please. And we know that because we know something of the impact of COVID. This is an unfinished picture, as we know, but in terms of the straightforward economic impacts, we know substantially more people on unemployment benefits since March. That number's going up and down over the months, of course, but that's a substantial percentage rise. We know that the number of people furloughed in this region was, by comparison to other regions, quite high. So 29% within the north of Tyne, slightly higher within the northeast. Across the board, that is 3-4 percentage points higher than the average across England in particular. And we know that existing inequalities have to a great extent been exacerbated by COVID. Now that is true in terms of we can look at the data across a number across sectors. Ethnic inequalities, gender inequalities, existing income inequalities, they've all been exacerbated, and certainly that's been the focus of some of what we've done, led by Councillor McCarthy, around inclusive economy and learning gaps. And we know particular issue at the moment, footfall in our high streets, towns, in our city centre is down. That will continue to be an issue as we cope with the impact of further lockdowns. So these aren't finished impacts. They're not you know, they change as we go, but they show you the scale of what we're having to cope with here. And then if you kind of look to the bottom of the piece, you'll see, again, just emphasising this point, that what we've tried to do is match the scale of the impact to the types of investments in areas that we know are important to recovery. So the thing to pick out here, we've talked about digital, green economy, vibrant communities. There's a really important point here on the bottom left, which I'm sure the Cabinet would want to stress, which is about not only creating new jobs, which is the really part of the fundamental point of the combined authority, but about doing what we can to innovate and protect jobs as well. This is not just about the creation of new things, it's about protecting what we've got. And so some of the focus is absolutely on that issue in particular. Paul, next slide, please. So we've set out in a recovery plan 5 areas where we think investment is really critical. They each contain a number of different proposals and schemes, if you like. You know, there's a big long list, as you can imagine. The first is around jobs and skills and livelihood, and what we've called a bold human capital strategy, essentially that mix of early years through education into skills and into jobs. We absolutely think we need bold investment brought up front in order to secure and help people move into jobs and skills opportunities quickly. And we'll come in a second to some of the specifics within that. Second is accelerating transition to the future economy, which is, as I've talked about, some of those investments that will secure our net zero transition faster, boost our global export potential. There's a lot around that arc from the north bank of the River Tyne all the way up to Blythe, which can support that in terms of existing infrastructure and companies that are well placed to take advantage of what might come next. Thirdly, we've picked out supporting our businesses, high streets and places, and that responds directly to lower footfall. That responds to the need for our local authorities in particular to adapt their places and streets. You know, if we're going to have rule of 6, if we're going to have less people able to eat inside, if we're going to have a mixed model of people being out and in buildings and using streets differently, then we're going to need support in order to enable our local authorities to enable that in their places to happen safely. So we're absolutely as one there in terms of the need for further resources. Fourthly, we picked out fiscal innovation, health and prevention, which shows the interdependence between health and growth. You cannot have sustainable growth without supporting the health of the region. And there are a number of areas in there where we think we could help government to innovate and support new models of growth that have health right at their heart. And then lastly, transport, infrastructure, connectivity. What we've done in this report is point to a much wider piece that's been done across the whole region on transport connectivity, which sets out a 5-year vision with substantial government investment potentially behind it to improve the connectivity in the region on not only kind of physical means. So we're not only talking about heavy rail, metro and buses, we're talking about digital connectivity here as well, which is so key. Next slide, please. So having gone through some of this, in the previous slide, I won't go through this in detail, but what this does is outline some of the areas within those 5 buckets that I've just picked out that we have emphasised. And you'll see areas here around skills and apprenticeship devolution, for example, around particular funding mechanisms to support towns and places, digital connectivity, and around unlocking what we know was slated within Rishi Sunak's budget early. Actually, it wasn't Rishi Sunak, forgive me, at the previous Chancellor's budget in March this year, which was looking to unlock long-term transport investment for the regions, and our proposition here is that we'll do what we can as a whole region to make sure that we're certainly in the queue for that. And then housing was mentioned earlier by Councillor Lar. We're building on what we think is good early progress with our Brownfield Land Fund, which was 24 million over a 5-year period devolved to the region. We think there's lots of opportunity here to build on that, not only with brownfield sites, but thinking about our strategic housing needs as a region more widely. Next slide, please. So what happens next? Well as we possibly can. Well, this is because it's very well we've done as that Mayor and Cabinet have shown on these issues over the last 2 years. So there's nothing necessary of the combined authority, but we know that we're in for a necessarily new here. This is a 2-3 month period now where some of this will turn into reality, and it will happen potentially in different ways. So what will we do about that? Firstly, we can advertise that, bring forward resources for COVID recovery in the north of Tyne, some of which we've done. We're working with Cabinet to make sure that we're doing that as much as we possibly can. Where there is resource, we know that actually if we can add value, then that is our job. And if you look at the, there's circa 80 million there. Don't quote me on the number exactly, but if you pull together what we have allocated as a Cabinet on Green New Deal, on climate-related investments, on offshore, for example, digital, culture, tourism recovery, housing, there's a substantial programme there that we're going to continue to deliver on, and that's really the most important thing. That is what we can influence and what we can do, and we'll prioritise working with on our inclusive economy policies and investments, as I've talked about. And then over the next couple of months, we will be working really intensively with colleagues across the region, with officials in Whitehall, mindful that this is a shifting piece in terms of when a devolution recovery white paper, a budget and a CSR may actually happen. We need to be ready for when that does, and that's absolutely the focus of the team and what I hope comes across in the slides I've just walked through. So I will finish there, Chair, and I hope that's okay.
Thanks for that, Henry. I'll open that up to questions or comments from members. Any member got any questions? Can't see any hands. Just in terms of, I'll start the ball rolling then. Well, thanks, Henry, for this piece of work. And I know you've done a fantastic job in working with colleagues across the region and spearheading this work behind the scenes a lot of the time. And when we're talking about working with colleagues in the wider North East region, I'm presuming you're referring to the LA7 and NECA, but has there been a little bit of wider thought of, just rather than being parochial and just thinking just the top of the Northeast, has there been conversations from a North of Tyne perspective that you've been involved with, looking at collaborating with the Tees Valley Combined Authority on areas of interest to our communities? Because likewise, that is also a wide conurbation that attracts jobs and employment and things. And if there's more joint up thinking and work across the region, the more the better. And I know that our Northeast LEP works quite well in conjunction with the Tees Valley LEP and the Cumbria LEP, and also the equivalent of LEPs, which I think are called Enterprise in Scotland, and I think it's the South of Scotland Enterprise Limited, or whatever the legal structure of that is. So I know that there is those conversations, but are those happening from a North of Tyne as well?
I would say to that a couple of things. We not to sound too glib about it, but absolutely, our mindset is we'll do whatever it takes to get the right order of resource into the region, and that includes collaborating with a really wide set of stakeholders across North of Tyne, LA7, that goes beyond the local authorities. So the business groups convened by CBI, but including chambers and Federation of Small Businesses, universities, TUC, voluntary sector. They've all been involved in creating these proposals, and I think it's important to recognise that. Absolutely, in terms of the relationship with Tees Valley, there's a good example is on clean growth, where if you look across the spread, assets around offshore wind in particular might reside in north of Tyne. If you think about that arc that we've discussed from the kind of subsea engineering sector within on the north bank of the Tyne up to Blythe, and if we look at potential sites and assets around things like hydrogen, then you're talking about potentially Tees Valley. So there's lots of awareness of where the comparative advantages are in areas where we need to work together. I would say also, if you were to ask our colleagues in Durham, who've been active contributors to the LA7 wide work, whether they work with Tees Valley, of course, because the geography is so close. So I would say absolutely yes, and we will do what it takes to secure the resource and work within, I think, the framework that government has tentatively offered, which means that we collaborate with other combined authorities too across the wider geography. So you'll see some of this, I would imagine, will be about devolution more generally, and what which funding is passed to combined authorities more broadly that could go beyond the northeast. So there's a number of determinants there, but it's a definite yes in terms of the mindset from the north of Tyne.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, from me, Chair. Thank you very much. It is scrutiny, this, but the problem we've got today is you presented a very fluid report, a very accurate report, hopefully. Lots of great detail in there, it's understood. So my question to you would be, have you encountered any problems with any of the other partners here, which you've come across a stumbling block at all? Or we're all working well in the LA7 or whatever makeup there is?
So I would say, well, if I start with north of Tyne, the pieces of work that you've seen, so the presentation that I've gone through is the result of a lot of collaboration. So there's a number of layers to that, working at the level of 3 local authority chief execs, their economic teams, their wider teams. When we're looking at some of the examples around public service reform, they're in there. A lot of dialogue with cabinet over time. I would say that's been really collaboratively done, and there's nothing in there that I would say is a point of conflict. That's all been brokered over time, and there's been collective leadership shown by cabinet on everything that's in that piece of work. I can't speak for others across the region more widely, but I would say tentatively and respectfully, there is absolutely a degree of collaboration going on that recognises, because of the scenario that we're in, because I think everybody recognises that we're in a COVID crisis here, and recovery means a degree of working together and collaboration that potentially wasn't there previously. So I think that's what's driving a lot of the work that's being produced, and certainly those cross-regional pieces, for example, that have been done via the Joint Transport Committee on Transport and Connectivity. They reflect again a degree of collaboration and thinking about the future that I think reflects the fact that everybody realises more of it's needed. So I would say no to your question about whether there's been tensions in the system. The one thing I would say, which is a caveat for all of us, is that we're putting together proposals here, and we there's some things we are confident about, some things we're less confident about, but genuinely we don't know how much of this will come to us as funding streams and the things that we need, and we're going to have to work together over time, just as collaboratively as we have been doing it, to make sure that we're as one when it comes to responding to the government measures in Spain.
Fine, thank you for that. If I may just finalise, this committee's mentioned the Mayor previously. Have we got such a high profile here? Basically, in layman's terms, does the rest of LA7 take this seriously, the North of Tyne? Have we got such a high profile? I know we're looking at the profile of the general members of the public, but is this something we could do for the North of Tyne to raise its profile again?
So just so I'm clear,
Yeah.
Are you talking about the publication of this work or
Equal
or
partners. Yes.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, this is just a personal view, but I think absolutely Norfolk Tyne is recognised as being not only an equal partner in that work across the northeast, but playing a really substantive role driving that work forward. I would say absolutely.
Fine. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Chair.
Just before I bring Councillor Lower into that, just to back up Henry there in response to Councillor Stewart's question, I do know that since we have become a mayoral combined authority, I would say it's probably a fair assessment that communication between the Cabinet of the North of Tyne and the chairs of the Joint Transport Committee, which is between the North of Tyne and the North East Combined Authority, and also the chair or the chair of the Leadership Board of the North East Combined Authority, has probably improved and positive in terms of looking at the wider piece and collaboration across the region, and also the lepers represented on both cabinets. So even though they're two distinct legal entities with their own priorities, I would say from conversations I've heard and what I've seen, that there is a thinking of greater collaboration where necessary and joint up working where it benefits both parties. And I'll move on to Councillor Lower now.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick bit. The presentation was very good, Henry. Thank you. But I was looking at a bit about the next steps, and you've got sort of a vision statement there about asking government to support recovery and things. I was wondering, we talk about the communities for North of Tyne, and I just wondered if there was anything corresponding to this for the other combined authorities, say south of the Tyne, that corresponds with this, because of course we've got the overlap with the LEP things. So are we all talking from the same document, shall we say? I mean, it's not going to be identical, but something that looks the same. And just how fluid is this, given that every day the circumstances change? I mean, it's not even weekly. You know, how much have we sort of drawn a line into this and said this is it, and then we'll have to keep looking at what we have to take forward in the future to maybe build on what whatever comes. Thanks, Chair.
Chair, if I could, in terms of the alignment. Of that wider regional piece, a version of that wider regional piece being made public too, but obviously that's a decision that's not mine to make. In terms of the second question, how fluid is this? Very, I mean, a really good question, and a really honest answer is that we are dealing with. Well, we've dealt with this. We're dealing with shifting timetable to begin with. So what we would have expected, I guess, probably what I said a couple of months ago when I was at a meeting discussing our early recovery proposals, was that we expected a white paper, a spending review, and a budget in the autumn, which would be around about September, October time, and we now know that that timetable is very likely to slip. We're talking about mid-November time the impact of some of the short-term measures that the Treasury has had to bring in, recent hospitality sector specific promises the Chancellor made on Friday, but also that the summer fiscal statement will have an impact on future funding. We don't know what that is yet because that's being worked through by the Treasury, but you're absolutely right that week by week we're having to kind of interpret and work within what is a really shifting context. I would say
united front from the northeast, whether it's north or south of the border. We need to be seen to be doing this and to have a proper concrete approach. I'm really pleased that we've got them all together, and hopefully we can keep it up, because there's all this fuss about funding and, you know, whether there should be more mayors and whether we should have more combined authorities, or, you know, the unitary should come together. All of these sorts of things going on at the minute with the government review. So I think it's good that we're keeping sort of a line that covers the whole of the northeast rather than just bits and pieces. Thanks, Henry.
Yeah. And I would just like to echo what Councillor Lower says then. I'm total agreement with that. And just to put my comment in the context there, ahead of today's scrutiny meeting, I've received quite a bit of communication from various different working together, that if our asks to govern by, and we're a stronger united front by being all on the same page working together, that we can get possibly 1.1 billion for the councils. And now that we've got a global pandemic and we've got to get through the COVID crisis together, and it's not just that, it's the recovery as well. Well, both the crisis and the recovery doesn't know arbitrary local government boundaries, and joint up approach and working with other local authorities, it's just the negativity doesn't help, and we need to work together where possible now moving forward. And of course, we all need to appreciate and adapt, understand that each local authority or each little community within a local authority has different needs and desires and aspirations, and accommodate that as much as possible. But just on the core principles of what we would say, you know, the things we fundamentally do all agree on, we need to rally behind, and as Councillor Lewis says, present a united front to government, because that's how governments of all parties of the past 20 odd years have operated, wanting clusters of local authorities working together. And whether we like the current devolution structure, and I have been critical about parts that I do agree and don't disagree on, but we've got to try and operate within the system and try and, it's better to be in the system and promote working together and get positive change than withdraw and be a cynic and just be put into the wilderness, quite frankly. Which leads me on to an actual question. That wasn't just a rant there. In terms of, you know, and this might be a question more for Paul and Henry and Ruth in conjunction together within their areas. When we get reports for the combined authority, and this is all reports, we have these, you know, impact assessments at the end, you know, in relation to qualities, inclusive economy, climate change and what engagement's taking place. Given that a vast majority of the geographical area of North Tyne Combined Authority is classed by government as being rural or of a rurality nature, even though we're in towns where we might not consider ourselves to be rural, it's classed as that. Could moving forward we look where it's appropriate, where proposals maybe have a positive impact upon rurality or potentially could have drawbacks, that those are accounted for as like a separate thing on rurality at the end, possibly moving forward?
Chair, I'm really happy to take that back and discuss with Paul and Ruth and work out how best to do that. Whether we're talking about and John Softly as well, of course, whether we're talking about a separate paragraph there or how we incorporate that into the categories that we've already got. I'll take a steer on that, but I can take that action.
Thanks.
Chair.
Is there any more comments or questions from members in relation to this agenda item? Councillor Early? I think your mic might be off. Is it just me, or can other people hear Councillor Early? No.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, I just received a message from her that she's in and out. Councillor Early, if you've got a question that, because I think members are having difficulty in hearing what you're asking, if you want to type it into the comments, I'll read it out and see if we can get a response. But in the meantime, we'll just note, or for a procedural point, that we have Councillor Sandra Graham, who is a member of North Tyneside Council and a member of this committee, who is in attendance, and we've got Councillor Rebecca Shatwell, who is a substitute member representing Newcastle City Council in the absence of the Vice Chair, Councillor Linda Wright. And if members would be happy, are we happy to move on and then bring Henry back for a question if Councillor Early's got a question, or is there any members who've got questions? Oh, I just seen a question from Peter.
Chair, I'm really happy to get back to Councillor Early over on the comment function if that's easier to keep things moving along. But your call.
The question that I've just got is in relation to the digital inclusion and education strategy, has all the money been allocated and has all the IT hardware reached the children?
The first part of that question is yes, in terms of the allocation of the investment to our local authority partners. The second part of the question, I will come back on the detail as per along with the answers to Councillor Lauer's earlier questions, if that's okay, Chair.
Okay. Any more questions or comments from members before we move on? No. So Peter's just replied, thanks for the answer there, Henry. So thank you for your attendance this morning, Henry, and it's always a pleasure having you attending our meetings, and look forward to your next update and working with you in between now and then.
Likewise. Thank you, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks. That takes us on to item 6, the adult education budget. And this morning we've got in attendance Councillor Joyce McCarthy, who's the Cabinet Member for Employability and Inclusion within the Combined Authority, and also the Deputy Leader of Newcastle City Council. And we've also got Dr. Henry Kippen, who's the Director of Economic Growth, and you've all received the report, and Is there any headlines that you would like to highlight?
Chair, if I can just do a broad overview of where we are, and I think in part addresses some of the questions that you have been asking through that item that Henry's just given. And Chair Henry will stay on the call for this aspect of the work in case there's, I want to say in case there's any difficult questions from you that I can't answer. Chair, you will all realise that being devolved the adult education budget in excess of £23 million is really good and is one of the significant benefits of being a combined authority. We wouldn't have had control of the work that we can fund without being given that devolved responsibility as other combined authorities across the country have been given. So I think today the report, and it is, Chair, a very, very detailed report of how we have managed, implemented, and now plan the monitoring of the spend. Chair, it's probably pertinent to say thank you to the team who have worked on this, because I come before you to respond to questions, but actually the team behind the scenes in the Combined Authority have put together all of this work. It's a mammoth task to spend that amount of money, go through the procurement process effectively, keep everyone on board, make sure that we're engaging everyone. It's been a huge piece of work. So I think, Chair, to place on record our thanks to Lee and the team would be helpful. Chair, just to be really clear, adult education previously was managed nationally. Hundreds of contracts were given to providers in our region, delivering support services to residents across the 3 local authority areas. I think they did do data capture, but I'm not sure that apart from through inspection, we had any information about the quality of that work, what difference that investment was making, apart from a kind of light touch. And I think this being devolved to our combined authority gives us that role and responsibility, really, and it means that we can in the future be much more responsive. Chair, the report in front of you sets out how we have taken a place-based approach, which will ensure we've got better outcomes for learners and that we're more aware of what those outcomes are. And we've also undertaken a significant piece of work to look at the skills that we need for the businesses that currently operate, but also keeping an eye on what's coming down the track. So, you know, our investment in digital is really, really important to us. And I think the way that we're using the funds of the Combined Authority, the work of the team in the Combined Authority will impact on what we can do through this kind of resource that we've got before us today. Chair, so I have said already, it's in excess of 23 million that we were devolved to spend, or at least to allocate by August. We've since been given an additional £1 million, which is a result almost a million, just under that, which is for sector-based work academy programs, which is even more jargon, Chair, and I apologise for that, and also high-value courses. That funding was agreed by the government over the summer, so we have implemented spend on that, and you've got details in your report. Chair, we have over the year, we've engaged providers, we've held lots of briefing sessions, we've responded to queries, but we've also tried to maintain stability in the sector because we didn't want to destabilise any of the key providers, the half dozen, 8, 10 key providers across the area. So we have tried to maintain that stability. And I think, Chair, this pandemic gives us more opportunities really to monitor the provision, to make sure, because we have got the facility to move things around, to change things, and we have got, as you'll see in the report, a small amount of underspend. So if there's a particular need that we can address using this budget, we've got the opportunity to do so. Chair, I think what I'm trying to set out is we've got the right response to this, that we're trying our best to make sure that we're using that resource effectively and appropriately. The first formal monitoring will be in November, so I can't tell you about how effective that is, what recruitment looks like, but we know that from the government perspective, colleges, adult education providers will continue to provide that work, but we need to acknowledge that the pandemic will have an impact. Chair, you've just referred to this in the report that you've just been through with Henry. As a combined authority, we've set out really clearly the policies that have all been agreed by us on social value, and that takes into account climate change, the good work agenda that we are supportive of. All of our procurement processes will run through that, and that is also true for the adult education budget. And the other aspect of this work, Chair, in my portfolio, we've set up the Inclusive Economy Board. And of course, the partners around that table have had a briefing on this work as well. And therefore, we can listen to them and contribute, I don't know, share their views and respond to them as well as we go through this. Aspects of this, Chair, include the current work with the Department for Work and Pensions. The government have announced programmes like Kickstart and the Youth Hubs. We are working collaboratively across North of Tyne so that the 3 local authorities and the combined authority are working together in a kind of seamless way to make sure that the support for young people is there and that we're working collaboratively to deliver that. Chair, I have said you've got a very detailed report in front of you today. You've got 2 cabinet reports. The initial one that agreed this and sets out the funding. You've had the update that we provided last month to Cabinet, and you've got several appendices with lots of figures in them. I think it's a really thorough update. I'm sorry I can't tell you about the effectiveness of all of that as yet, but I hope that that tells Overview and Scrutiny members of the work that's been underway and our plans for the near future. And Chair, I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Councillor McCarthy. And as Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I'd just like to place on record on behalf of the committee as well, we do appreciate the work and time and effort that our officers put into all their projects. And I would say it's fair to say our officers are really passionate about their work, and as an organisation, we're probably punch above our weight in terms of resources for the amount of work that we do. And just a personal thanks to you. I really appreciate that you are a cabinet member who regularly comes before Overview and Scrutiny and is interested in engaging with us and keeps us updated. And I would probably say in terms of that, you're our star cabinet member for the amount of times you've appeared before the committee, and just I hope you continue to work with us moving forward. And it'll just be really interesting to see how this project that you've been spearheading on develops over the coming months, especially given the current situation we're in. And I look forward to seeing that. And again, just to reiterate what I've said earlier on, again, this is more additional money for the region and everything. And it just shows that by working together, we get more influence and power for government, for getting devolved powers, because you rightfully highlighted that combined authorities aren't about duplicating work of local authorities. It's about putting together, coming together and getting additional powers and additional budget for things that individually we wouldn't be able to do, but by coming together we can. So I would open that up to questions from committee members or comments. Any comments or questions from members? Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor McCarthy, for that presentation from the very extensive report. I'm greatly reassured because I think we've managed to get into North of Tyne at just the right time, and I think we all feel that, and in our area can heave a sigh of relief that in some ways this will go to bridge the gap with the skills. And I'm so pleased to see the lists of companies that are on board. And as this goes forward, I'm sure other companies that see the benefit of this in upskilling and retraining will come into. So thank you very much, and thank you to your cabinet members for doing this, and on behalf of everybody, because this is something that we've never seen before, and we hopefully unlikely to ever see again. And we need every penny we can get to make this work for the people of the North East. Thank you. Thank you, Joyce.
Chair, can I just respond to that? Thank you very much, Councillor Graham. That is really helpful. And of course, we could have also included the very long list of businesses, companies and providers who were disappointed, because clearly going through a procurement process means that there will be people who are awarded contracts and others. The other thing you've got in front of you is the subcontractors. The way adult education has worked over the years is that organisations bid for money and then subcontract others. And I think this means that we can much more clearly identify the good providers and the not so good providers. So I think it will help inform us for the future. And Chair, if I can just come back to Sandra's comment about skills. We will review the skills plan with the LEP over this. I think it's planned to be published in December. And so actually that will help to inform us about next year's spend, because although, Chair, I'm just providing you with an update on what we're doing for the current academic year, actually we have to start the process for next academic year really soon as well. So of course it's a sort of, it will be a bit of an iterative process. We will use the November first monitoring to help inform that, but we will also need to respond to the skills overview that is currently being developed with the LEP as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe?
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. It's a very detailed report, and I think there's a lot of promise in there. I just wondered how much we were taking into account green jobs and new energy jobs, you know, things that could be looking more towards the future than some of the things we have here. I mean, I know we need them all, but I just wondered if there was a piece of work that was going on maybe to identify where those opportunities might be across the region.
Chair, that's a really important point. And we are trying to use the work that we are currently funding. So, you know, the system in North of Tyne is that every proposal comes through the investment panel, and the investment panel are constantly looking to see how many, you know, what do we need to do? Are we joined up in relation to that? Have we got the right offer in terms of the skills and training support that makes sure that people in North of Tyne can apply for those jobs? So if we're creating new jobs or securing existing jobs, both of those elements need to be taken into account. And I think we do that reasonably effectively. We can always get better, of course, because there is a bit of a lag between when the, you know, and some of the training, some of the skills work that went to develop the first offer around the employed and the unemployed, all of that was taken into account in that, but there will be more jobs. And of course, we're a small region, so actually a conversation about how we work with South of Tyne, people travel over the conurbation, don't they, regularly. So we can't, when we're providing jobs for the region, not just for residents, although we want to target North of Tyne. Chair Henry might want to add something to that.
Yeah, I just saw that he indicated to speak, so I'll bring in Henry then back to Councillor Lowe for, because I saw that she indicated to wish to speak again.
Chair, just to reinforce the point that Councillor McCarthy made about skills being a part of every investment that we make, we have, or the cabinet, I say we, the royal we I'm using, cabinet has allocated headline investments in some of the areas aligning to the original economic vision. We talked earlier about offshore, about digital, about culture and creative. Each of those headline investments have an element that is dedicated to skills provision. Some of those have some of that funding has been defrayed in terms of existing projects, and obviously there's alignment with AEB, but there's also some work to come, as Councillor McCarthy said, over the next 2-3 months to make sure that we are using that wisely in a post-COVID context and in alignment with where the wider regional work on skills for growth is headed. But it's absolutely the case that every major investment that the Cabinet has made has an element that is dedicated to skills provision, particularly in those new areas like clean growth and digital that Councillor McCarthy picked up on.
Yeah.
Councillor Lowe?
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Just one more point, and I mean, I don't expect you to answer it now, but just something I wonder was being considered. Because of the current situation, a lot of this training will be offered remotely in some cases. But for those who have to travel, we have a very diverse region. And I just wondered what we were doing about travel and access to help people get to these training positions. Because obviously, if you live in rural Northumberland or even parts of rural Newcastle, it's difficult to actually to get out of the place and to get there, and it's very expensive. So I just wondered if there was anything that was being considered around that. Thanks, Joyce.
Chair, just to reassure Councillor Lower, we did take that into account in the initial process of the decision making, because we realised that in order to offer training opportunities right across our area, some of the costs of travel, the issue that you raise, Anita, is really obvious. It's quite expensive, and if you can't afford to get there, that is a real problem, because it isn't then a universal offer across, for available to all residents. So we took that into account in all of the decisions that we made initially, and made sure that a provider that was somewhat, I don't know, a provider in Northumberland would make sure that they had a contribution towards travel costs if that was required to enable learners to access that training. The other thing that we've done, and Councillor Early asked this of Henry about the digital inclusion money. So we were aware when we allocated that emergency response to COVID over the summer that it wasn't just children in schools who needed access to digital devices. It was also adults who were unable to continue with their training offer because they didn't have access to digital devices either. So we did allocate funding for that. I think it might be Henry in his response to Peter might be able to include what we've done around that, which enhances the work that was on offer and means that we've tried to be as joined up as possible and recognise that adults also need that support. And I think, Chair, if I can just go back to Peter's question that he's put into the chat, that's great to hear. I think we'll get much more of that update on local initiatives and the difference that that is making in November when we bring that back. We're taking that to Cabinet once we've collected that. So I suggest that we provide that to Scrutiny as well, Chair, if that seems appropriate, so you get a feel for what this is. And I can't think of timing about whether it comes as part of my portfolio, my normal portfolio update, but we'll find a way of making sure that you've got that update as well once the Cabinet have got it. Thank you, Chair.
Much appreciated, Councillor McCarthy. And just following on from your comment there, I know you come regularly to give a portfolio update, but would you be, if you're saying that it's useful for Scrutiny to be involved in that, I wholeheartedly grateful for that and agree with you. Would you be prepared to come to a future meeting that might be out with your normal cycle just to be here and present on a specific report just for an update on that area of work?
Of course, Chair. I think as Cabinet colleagues, we all need to be available to Scrutiny, to the Scrutiny panel to respond to questions. It is part of our democratic governance process. And I'm sure other Cabinet colleagues and all of the officers who support us in that work are very happy to come and report to you.
Thank you. And just for the record, we got the answer before the question. Councillor Early did put a comment in the chat that he thinks that the devolution of the adult education budget is already starting to bear fruit in terms of the range of targeted local initiatives being undertaken. So that was what you were responding to.
Thank you, Chair.
Do any other members have any comments or questions? I don't see anything. So as a committee, are we happy to note this report and receive future updates on this piece of work?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. So thank you for your attendance, Councillor McCarthy. And that takes us on to items 7, the schools and education update. And in attendance this morning, we have got Paul Hanson, who is the head of paid service of the North Tyne Combined Authority and is the lead chief executive for education. I think Okay, is Paul's gonna come back in because his microphone wasn't working. Just give him a moment. Yeah, there seems to be a technical problem with the Paul's microphone. Paul, do you want to try calling in on your phone? So, okay, we'll just wait for him to connect on the phone. Sorry about this.
Chair, hopefully Paul will be able to dial back in. If by some chance he can't, I'm happy to attempt to sub for Paul for this item.
Okay.
Just so you know, but I'm sure he'll find a way back in.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Henry. Hello, Paul?
Hello.
Yep, we can hear you now.
Thank you. Because the issue for me, I'm sure Henry was wondering why I left him hanging a couple of times, because I could actually explain a couple of things, and I realised that I couldn't attract your attention or Henry's. So sorry about that, everyone. I am going to try and join on camera and speak on phone and hope the two don't dislike each other too much.
Okay.
Okay. Good morning. I'm really sorry that this is having to be done by phone. It's nice to be overviewing Scrutiny, and it was good to be here for the first hour or so just to listen to the debate and the interest that members are taking and in what we're up to. I'm Paul Hanson for certainly Councillors Hall, Early and Graham. I'm familiar as the Chief Executive of North Tyneside Council, and for Councillors Stewart, Lower Dunn, Chartwell, I am also the Head of Paid Service for North of Tyne Combined Authority and have been since the beginning of the year. And I'm delighted to try and help with an update on where we are with our education work. What we've given you is a summary report and then the full education strategy as presented to and agreed by Cabinet. If it's okay with you, Chair, what I thought I would do is just give a little bit of context and the policy framework around this, a little bit about how we got here, where we are and where we're going next, and then I'm happy to answer questions. Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Super. If I drew members' attention to paragraph 1.3 on page 64 of their agenda pack, there's a lovely diagram that I wish I could claim credit for, but I didn't. And the important bit about that picture is that is the policy framework for our education work as a combined authority. So I'm sure members understand and have spoken to Councillor Daly, for example, that the devolution deal for North of Tyne includes an opportunity and a piece of homework. So there are two things that relate to education in the devolution deal. One of them is the right of the North of Tyne Combined Authority to seek government support with an education challenge. So that's cash and powers to improve education across the North of Tyne. And in exchange, a commitment from the constituent authorities and the combined authority to work together to improve education for children and young people across North of Tyne. As an officer team, quite a lot of this work started immediately the devolution deal was agreed, and an awful lot of work was done, particularly with our head teachers and education leaders, first of all, to understand the state of the area, if you like, in terms of where we were and what they thought their collective priorities might be for our children and young people. Quite a lot of engagement work was done. There were a series of informal policy discussions with Cabinet, and then in April of last year, the Cabinet agreed its priorities for the Joint School Improvement Strategy that were based on the evidence and the engagement we'd done. The first of those was making sure that every young person north of Tyne was ready for school. Lots and lots of young people north of Tyne are ready for school, and in fact, as a region and as an area, we perform quite well in terms of early years. But about 28% of our young people don't reach a good standard of development at the foundation stage, and that's about 80-odd classes of early years children north of Tyne. And Cabinet, in particular, felt we could do better. Equalities were really important, as were the standards, and the Cabinet wanted us to focus on educational achievement for everyone and for closing the gap in education attainment progress between those children and young people that came from areas with less deprivation and those north of Tyne who came from areas of greater deprivation, because as you will know as experienced elected members, you can see that difference in a number of outcomes in terms of the impact of deprivation on education attainment. Obviously, the North of Tyne Combined Authority is very much a combined authority thinking about the economy north of Tyne, and a priority for the Cabinet was making sure that the careers pathways were in place. Councillor Lower mentioned earlier the new and emerging jobs around green energy and sustainable development. Henry explained that for each of our investments, we consider the skills issues around all of this. And as Councillor McCarty pointed out, the investment panel in particular, as we make our investment decisions, are thinking about where are the opportunities for children, young people and adults across our area. And one of the things that Cabinet were keen to do was to make sure that as we think about the Joint School Improvement Strategy, as we work together on careers pathways, we're looking to take absolute advantage of those sectors where we have strength, growth, and where the combined authority is investing. And then finally, in discussion with education leaders, looking at the national data and the local picture, the Cabinet asked the officer team to focus on leadership, recruitment, and retention, making sure we were succession planning for our education leaders, making sure we were recruiting and retaining people into education across North of Tyne. So they were the priorities against which Cabinet wanted to do our education work. And the first order task that I undertook with the then portfolio holder, Councillor Wayne Daly, was to develop our education challenge and have an ask ready of government. In doing that, we looked at the London Education Challenge, some of the work that had been done in the Manchester area, and some of the opportunity areas that the Department for Education had put in place across the country. And the advice given to us and the experience of the people that participated in those was to focus on 2 or 3 things that we felt were really, really important. And in a policy context, Cabinet felt that where we wanted particular cash and support were around ready for school and the early years work, that educational achievement for all and standards, and the leadership, recruitment and retention piece. Cabinet then went a little further and wanted to frame those policy priorities in terms of ambitions. There was a real feeling across the Cabinet that they wanted to have ambition for our education work. And in this, Cabinet had a number of informal conversations, but wanted to be brave around this. So their ambition that every young person was ready for school, that all schools north of Tyne were good or outstanding, that making sure no one was left behind, that we could develop a universal mental health office at all schools, that we could create a North of Tyne teacher deal and create a leadership deal, were ambitions they felt were things that were worth striving for. Clear that some of those measures are a bit rough around the edges. And we are very, very clear that Ofsted judgments are a very blunt tool, but we know that they are important in terms of community confidence. We know that it's a really big ask to say, okay, 800 young people are in danger of missing out from education or employment each year. How do we capture each of them? We know that it is tricky to get universal mental health services right for children and young people right now. The Cabinet felt they were important. So in process terms, what we did was through the summer last year was we ran a series of workshops with various individuals, partners, stakeholders, education leaders, businesses, everybody who might be interested, the NHS, colleagues, a range of folk, and we took each of those ambitions, we looked at the data, we looked at what it was telling us about how far away we were from achieving that ambition, we thought about the barriers to achieving that ambition, and we thought about what powers and cash might make a difference. And on those 6 occasions, we had a series of really dynamic conversations that were enormous fun to be part of, given the range of opinions and expertise in the room. We ran those in partnership with the Regional Schools Commissioner's team, who came along and talked about where we were nationally in policy terms on this. And we came out the other end of that with an idea about how we would pitch the ask to government. In process terms, that then became a political kind of discussion. And certainly Councillor Daly is then Cabinet member, Councillor Jackson is then leader in Northumberland, used some of their direct contacts with government to talk that through, and we provided a bit of a prospectus that was in conversation with ministers and senior officials. We followed that up more recently by making sure it is part of our earlier, the North of Tyne Combined Authority has put in its ask that education challenge as part of that, and we will see how those conversations develop. But I think one of the things I would have said had my microphone worked when Henry was talking about the recovery plan earlier is sometimes you will know as experienced politicians, having a plan is the handy thing. So when things are fluid, and government is thinking about, a rapid response to a changing situation, if we've got a bit of a clue and we know what it is we want to do, we've got a fighting chance of at least seeing some of the cash and powers flow towards that clue. So across all of our recovery work, while we might not just get a big check, what we can do at a combined authority level is demonstrate competence, as Councillor McCarthy and the team have done in spades on adult education. That leads to things like the grant around brownfield housing, and we know that we can work with our Regional Schools Commissioner and DFE to align national activity and funding towards some of the things that we have put in place. The last bit the report explains we've done around that combined authority kind of education challenge is naturally this year's had to feature in it. And we've had to rethink around learning loss and how we would support young people. So that's the education challenge. In terms of the joint improvement strategy, I know the members on the line will absolutely understand that if anybody thinks as politicians or a local authority chief executive that I can tell my head teachers and school leaders what to do. They're a bit delusional. But what we have here is probably an important collaboration, first of all, between the combined authority and the three constituent authorities, where the officer teams have come together to work on the evidence base, the current position around our schools, and what we can do collaboratively that would make a difference and add value across the North of Tyne area. That's not a compulsion or direction thing. What we're trying to do is make it sticky and make sure it's a thing that's useful and adds value to the issues education leaders and partners have identified as important. What we have done, and you can see in some detail, is looked at the evidence, had a bit of a think about what we need to do under each of those areas, and begun to come forward with some practical things that will make a difference. Right across the patch, the local authority reps, sector experts, Education Endowment Foundation, school leaders have put a bit of an ed tech working group together. Councillor McCarthy and Henry earlier talked about making sure the right kit and connectivity is with children right across our patch. That's an issue in both areas of deprivation, but also in areas of rurality, as we keep trying to remind people that sometimes a phone signal is an important thing in parts of our patch. The work we've been doing on local full fibre network and connectivity is about making sure that we can actually connect our schools to some of the virtual offers and connect our children and young people to some of the learning opportunities. We've also been done to do some work around careers pathways. The advantage of being a primarily economically driven combined authority is there is a significant amount of business engagement and a significant amount of sector investment. That means that we're not talking hypothetically about education into employment. We can absolutely draw connections to, I should have said pun intended, we can draw connections between career pathways and actual practical opportunities. And in the work that we're doing, Councillor McCarthy alluded to our social value approach earlier, we can absolutely use some of our leverage to create opportunity for young people as they are leaving education. We've also made, and it's been a bit tricky the last few months, but some of our early investments were about trying to target this kind of work. There's a significant project in place with the Newcastle United Foundation, which is about a futures programme, particularly aimed at the young people who are in danger of missing out, and using the attractor and brand of Newcastle United and football to get young people in the classroom. This is work that the foundation have done, the Newcastle Eagles have done. We know it works, that sport can be a breakthrough moment that can get young people engaged in education. And that project is specifically targeted at schools that might be struggling with standards and communities that might be struggling with young people who are at risk of not being in education, employment or training. But we've, in parallel, we've also done some work on enriching the curriculum and using our assets across the north of Tyne. We've got a great project around STEM and digital skills that uses the Woodhall Museum, but also uses Kielder Observatory and its technical abilities to engage young people in thinking about STEM. We've done some wider work more recently with Open Reach around our local full fibre network stuff that's based on women in engineering. And we're trying to make sure that the work we do across the combined authority directly links to an opportunity to improve education outcomes. A little bit like the adult education budget, it's very early days on this, but that sense of collaboration, cooperation, and a bit of work with the Regional Schools Commissioner on things like piloting the early years, the early career framework means that we're doing some practical things that might make a difference. I'll pause there and I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. Just my microphone wasn't working there, saying there. Thank you for that presentation update in terms of the education challenge there. Has any members got any comments or questions for Paul? Councillor Shatwell.
Hi, thanks so much for your report. Apologies, I had technical difficulties earlier, so I missed Henry's first presentation. So apologies if this was covered in that. But I guess the obvious question really is the effect of the pandemic on this work. The report does mention that COVID has increased issues for young people, not in education, employment or training, and also mental health issues. So I suppose I just wondered how has the education challenge priorities, those three priorities, been affected by COVID? Are there any new barriers to achieving the ambitions and additional resources or partnerships needed? I'm thinking particularly around the spike in mental health problems, which isn't just a short-term response to the pandemic, but is going to be a long-term issue for lots of children and young people. Thanks.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure it's come up with any new ones, Councillor. I think it's made some of the existing ones harder. So I think what we can see in terms of early evidence is we were right to worry about connectivity for our communities and particularly young people, because there's a lot that education leaders in particular told us there's a lot of assumptions about virtual learning, virtual CPD for teachers, and that's smashing as long as you can connect. And then obviously the issues around teaching from home were particularly acute for people who couldn't get kit and connectivity. And certainly in the cabinet, and I'm always a bit nervous about talking in front of my political team around education, given that Councillor McCarty and Norma Redfern have forgotten more than I know about it. But there was a keenness to make sure we made practical differences as soon as we could see that it got worse. The mental health one, I think, is an interesting one, and we're doing quite a lot of work across the patch around getting schools open and normalising what's necessary. So, you know, about this time, we expected to have a portable observatory in schools and a whole bunch of other stuff we were doing. In reality, across the summer, the whole of the officer team north of Tyne piled in to try and make sure we could get schools open ahead of the holidays and then after. We've done quite a lot of conversations with the NHS around some of their mental health trailblazers and how they work with young people, but we've also tried to work hard at normalising and working with some brilliant education leaders at trying to bring young people back in a safe way, and in a way that doesn't shock them. But that question about a universal mental health offer remains. And as we go into the winter and the spring, we're starting to get a better picture of what the issues will be and what we potentially can do around that. But I think, I'm not sure the partnerships are different. I think that we've got the right people around the ball. I think we're building a bit of collaboration, which is always helpful. And I think if I had a worry, and I know the political team are ahead of me and worrying about this, it's the inequalities that we already highlighted will be deepened, and we might have to work a bit harder and a bit faster.
Thank you for that, Paul. Any other questions or comments? I can't see anybody, but it might just take a moment for somebody's camera to come back on. So in the meantime, just a technical question for Paul. Thanks for this report. In terms of the joint school improvement strategy, on the very last page, under the Education Improvement Board for the North of Tyne Combined Authority, it states that it's proposed that yourself, in consultation with the portfolio holder, finalise the terms of reference for and appointments to the Education Improvement Board. Now, as things currently stand, I understand that there's no other cabinet member directly responsible for being the portfolio holder for education improvement. So with that in mind, would you be content? Obviously, the consultation will be with the mayor or the deputy mayor and the three leaders of the constituent authorities, but would you be happy sharing those terms of reference with Overview and Scrutiny of how the appointments will work?
So there will be, obviously we've just had a bit of a change within cabinet,
yeah,
and there's a couple of things that we're just working through in terms of portfolios. So, and in real terms, this one, there was originally a North Education Improvement Board established on a sub-regional basis. So there's been a bit of a footprint that was officer-led in place for some time that was a function of the Regional Schools Commissioner. We agreed with Cabinet that what we would do in due course is turn that into an Education Improvement Board that would lead this. At the moment, I've just taken, in conversation with Cabinet, we will do this, but we haven't done it yet. And certainly Adrian, who's leading the work, Henry and I have been in discussion with the Mayor and Cabinet about who are the right partners around the table. As we get into that, as Councillor McCarthy's demonstrated with the Inclusive Economy Board, as we do that, obviously we'll be transparent around that and how we do it. Right now, we've just slowed down the work on that till while we're all a bit busy with the immediate.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to work through terms of reference and how all of that board is going to work as Cabinet tackle that.
Okay. Thanks for that. Any other questions or comments from members? I don't see any. So are members happy to note the report from Paul? Yeah, from members that I can see, I've got a majority indication that they're happy to note that. So, yep. Thank you for your attendance this morning, Paul. And it's always great to see a chief executive turn up to overview and scrutiny. And hopefully it's been an insight on how we operate as a committee, and look forward to having you back again sometime soon.
Thank you very much, Chair. I look forward to being able to actually contribute to that next time. Yeah. So my apologies. I'm glad we managed to pull that one out of the fire.
Yeah.
You take care, and I hope everybody stays safe. Cheerio.
Okay. Yeah, keep in touch. But so I'm going to move agenda item 8, which is the Northeast Local Enterprise Partnership update, to after item 12, because Helen Golightly was meant to present this, who's the Chief Executive of the Northeast Local Enterprise Partnership, but she has submitted her apologies for this meeting, and herself and the new chair of the Local Enterprise Partnership, Lucy Winskill, will attend a future meeting. And the reasoning behind moving it as well is because we have Janice Gillespie, who's our Chief Finance Officer, presenting budgetary items later on in the meeting, and she'll be presenting for this item as well. So we'll move on to item 9, which is the North of Tyne Communications. In attendance, we have Stuart Tarbuck, who's our new Head of Communications, Engagement and Organisational Development. So I'll hand over to you, Stuart.
Thank you, Councillor Roughhead. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. Yeah, so I'm new in post, and I think this is just end of month 2, just heading into month 3 right now. Yeah, so good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me along today. I'm just going to run through quickly our report, but I hope eventually I can meet you guys face to face rather than through video conferencing. So today I'm going to do talk to you about a conversation about how we start a two-way conversation with our partners and residents. I'm going to give an overview of the new approach we've been developing, and I'll talk through the main issues as we see them, and then we can have a discussion. The context, just next slide, Paul. So the context, obviously, in which we communicate is always very important, and there are several current factors that I want to talk through that are strongly affecting the way we develop communications and engagement. We start by working in partnership, and NTCA is a new organisation. Relatively speaking, we are committed to being collaborative in our approach, and that collaboration is at the heart of our values. And we're here to work alongside and in partnership with our other constituent local authorities. We then also have a wider region to work in partnership with, including, as we've talked about earlier in this meeting, the North East LEP, the North East Combined Authority, and all the other local authorities in that wider region. Plus, we have a rapidly growing list of organisations that we're going into partnership with and we are investing in. And of course, we need to work with Westminster and Whitehall at the national level. So this is quite a list of partners, and we want to develop an approach that strengthens our relationships with all of those. That is to make sure partners feel included and really are included in our work. This means that engagement is as important as communication. We cannot just broadcast information to our audiences. Communications must support real engagement with those we work with, so they're involved in the development of our work. We must start that two-way conversation so that we can hear from our partners and our audiences and hear and listen to what they are saying. This is very much part of a wider process that's not just about communication, it's about all our work in the Combined Authority, which is co-designing and co-developing and co-delivering the pieces of work that we're on with. We know that many organisations, and we'll all be part of, have experience of this, many public sector bodies operate by simply telling people, by simply broadcasting their messages in a sort of one-way direction. But by contrast, we want to start engaging our audiences and engaging our partners to bring them in so that they're part of what we do. So just a sort of recent example of that is that we've, I don't know whether you've seen some of the promotional work we've done on it, but we've launched crowdfund North of Tyne. And for this piece of work, we've worked in partnership with Space Hive and the local voluntary and community sector to deliver a platform that brings people together. So that platform brings people together to help people fundraise for community activity. And being just involved in that and helping get that platform set up and launched and getting people involved, I've already seen the impact of that, that engagement approach, that it's brought community groups together, connected them to each other, and even at this very early stage, seeing people sort of starting to share ideas with each other. So our engagement work, I would say, in that sense, has facilitated these new connections and new relationships between people. Of course, Space Hive is, as most of our platforms are right now, digital platforms. So we're focusing very much on a digital first approach. We obviously need to make sure that we have other channels of communication and the more traditional ways of getting information out. But digital really is key. The ongoing current crisis is deepening very rapidly our use of social and digital communications. One fact that struck me, and I put in the report, was that in the second quarter of this year, Twitter users went up by 1/3 in just a quarter of a year. So that's a sort of phenomenal, globally, that's a phenomenally large amount of people moving and starting to get involved in online communications. But also in our own work, we know that video conferencing has been around for about 2 decades, but I haven't really used it in those 2 decades, and yet in the last 6 months, barely an hour goes by without a Zoom call or a Teams call or getting in touch with our family and friends using FaceTime. So there's a radically changing environment in which we're communicating at the moment. And our approach to developing engagement with people must put digital content first. So we must develop our online channels. Roughly for our partners at the moment, we're kind of, Twitter is our kind of main channel for sort of partner reach. With residents, we're sort of developing a place on Facebook and developing our Facebook profile. And then, of course, there's that difficult challenge of reaching out to young people. Is it Snapchat? Is it TikTok? That rapidly changing way that young people use this social media to connect and engage with each other. So all of those channels need managing. So we need to start developing an approach to managing those channels. And of course, they're not one-way channels, they're two-way people ask questions, people get in touch, and there is an opportunity, if we manage those channels effectively, to build our relationships, our followers, and hopefully some fans in time. And then I guess the other thing to say about that kind of social world is that what works best on it is telling real stories of real people. Storytelling has always been really, really important, but social and digital channels make it even more so. So to bring those real stories to life, we need to gather case studies and work with our partners to gather those case studies to bring our work to life and communicate our work through the real impact that it's having on real people. There's a big challenge there, I think, for a combined authority. Our work is necessarily about investing, and investment takes time to come to fruition. So there's a long lag between when we announce our investment and then when we have those real stories of how it's affected people's actual lives and we're able to tell those stories. It's quite a lag. So communicating both the decision about what investment is important, but then also building relationships with our partners to get those case study stories together to show the impact. So that's kind of the kind of four main areas that I think set the context for the communications that we need to develop. And so the three broad themes that we have discussed informally with Cabinet and with staff across the organisation is these three kind of broad themes of getting the basics right, telling our story, and then engaging with residents. To make sure that we're able to work and keep on top of our complex partnership relationships, we need to develop a strong forward planning process. So we've put in place a clear communications forward plan. That planning process is now a routine activity for the organisation, and we're engaging all officers across all of their projects to talk about the communications that will be required for those projects and planning them in a routine way. This plan brings structure to our communications activity. So we know what we'll be talking about on each individual day of the week. And then we're also looking ahead. And so far, we're probably planning about 3 to 6 months ahead. Obviously, the further ahead you are, the more loose the plan is. And then we're sort of nailing that down to try and get to kind of what we're talking about on every individual day. So that's a process that we've recently put in place. And that plan creates focus and I believe allows us to tell a stronger story in particular weeks about what we're up to. So last week, we talked about, or 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the recovery plan that Henry's presented to you. Last week, we talked about digital communications and the investment that we've been doing in, digital infrastructure, investment we've been doing in digital infrastructure. This week, we're going to talk about some case studies of real people's lives that have been changed by investing in them and trying to give them confidence to get back in the workplace. And then another part of the getting the basics right is the new website that we've put in place. This site is a refresh of the old one and makes the website more appropriate, as often public sector sites aren't, makes the website appropriate for smartphone use and for tablet use, and able to host video content. And I think it's important to remember when we think about websites that they don't need to have too many fancy bells and whistles on them. It's really important that our social media content is engaging, that pushes people to our website. So the website does look quite simple, but it is appropriate for use on your phone and on your tablet. And then I've just touched on this before about building our channels, but just coming back to Facebook, we have about 2,000 followers on Facebook and 3,000 followers on Twitter. That's not particularly high. We've got a lot of work to do, I think, to drive that up, but that is improving. So this time last year, we had just 300 people following us on Twitter, and we now have 10 times that amount at 3,000. And we'll do that. We'll grow our social following by using better content. And how do we get that better content? We need to build our relationship with our partners so that they understand what we're asking for. So when we're working with our partners, we need to be asking them to provide us with case studies of real examples of people whose lives have been changed. So just lost my thread there. So as we continue to develop these channels of communication, it's really important for us to tell our story as well. And we've just done that. Henry's just talked you through the recovery deal work that we've just done, and what we did there was have a look again at about our vision and our ambition. We wanted to develop our national reputation, so we create opportunities to work with people nationally and leverage funding for us. So if I just go back to what Henry did when we looked at that recovery package, Henry said we provided a document for government, which was important that it had the depth. So we told our story in three ways. We had the depth that we provided to government. We also provided an animation, a 2-minute, just a really short animation that we could use on social media with the public to engage them with the same piece of work. And then there's the 4-pager document that we've been sharing with yourselves, with others across the region, to explain to them. So telling the same story in a number of different ways for different audiences. And then, of course, as well as telling our story and making that readily available and understandable to people, we do need to maintain our focus on engaging with residents. So while everything I've talked about is really important for that, we need to develop real stories, and hopefully over time we'll get those as our investment comes to fruition. And for example, this week we are promoting the Cedarwood Trust, which is just looping back to the AEB budget we were talking about earlier. That's funded from that budget, and we've got real examples of people's lives being changed by how that budget is being spent, and they'll be shared on social media in video format this week. And we'll also continue to work out ways to engage residents with the work of the Combined Authority. So the mayoral question times, which we've been developing and trying to particularly do them with specific audiences such as young people or disabled people. And we'll continue to co-develop specific projects such as the crowdfund North of Tyne platform that I've just talked about. And also we're looking at Citizens Assembly on climate change. So these are ways of, yes, communicating, but really engaging with people. Next slide, Paul. Cool. So this autumn, really, and running up to Christmas, is about securing the recovery deal. That's what we're all talking about, and we need to make sure that we get as much money and cash for our region as is possible. And then as we go into next year, I think there's an opportunity for us in the new year to talk about not only what we have achieved so far. I think that we need to be looking at celebrating the success of the Combined Authority so far, but also in this changing environment start to, once we have some firm understanding of what the spending review would look like and some of those changes in the way the local government landscape is changing, we'll be able to set out our next chapter of our role in that and what we will be doing. But that's the kind of stuff on the horizon. Okay, so that's the approach we're taking to communication so far, and I'd be happy to take questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Stuart. Very insightful piece of work that you're doing there. Just before we go into questions, I've just received a notification from one of the officers asking if we can just pause for a few moments to allow the live streaming issues to be resolved. So we'll just take a moment's pause, and once I get told it's okay to proceed again, we'll. topics. So and I'll open that up to questions for Stuart from committee members or comments. Councillor Shatwell.
Hello. Thanks so much for your report. I really, really enjoyed that presentation. I completely agree that communication isn't just about a one-way broadcast, and completely agree that, especially at the moment, real stories and case studies are really important. I also wanted to just acknowledge that the crowdfund North of Tyne has already reached my ward, and there are some community projects already having ideas. So thanks for that as well. I guess I just had two questions. I completely understand that your priority is your forward planning, communication, the recovery deal, and the and stories linked to your economic investment. But I guess I was curious just what you said about real stories, because I think real stories are so important at the moment. And I think in the pandemic, it's been sort of feels like the public health messages that have been based on key workers telling their own stories have been the things that have affected people and maybe affected behaviour change the most. So I suppose I did wonder whether there was anything that you'd be doing to work with local authority partners on sort of the public health message side of COVID response as well. And the second question was really, I'm on the climate committee in Newcastle, so obviously I've been following the Citizens Assembly, and it's really great that you've been able to announce the people you're working with on that. But if you had any further updates on the timescale and the comms strategy around getting that message out, that would be helpful as well. Thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so I think on the public health messages, I think we will be working with our partners to amplify what they're putting out. And I think, and I suppose we are a small player in that in terms of our local reach. I think the reach of our constituent local authorities is far wider than ours is as a combined authority, but we can certainly, help. Our audience is probably more regional and national, but we can show that what our local authorities are doing to make sure they're getting the messages over. I guess in the next week or so, there's going to be a lot of complicated messages around what the tiers mean and what it means to be in a different tier. I've kind of looked through some of that already, and I was like, this is going to be quite difficult to communicate. But we will support that for sure. And I think I'm in sort of weekly contact with my colleagues at the comms colleagues at the constituent authorities, just checking in, and we are here to help and support them for whatever they need. But I guess we don't have direct public health responsibilities as some of the combined authorities do. We don't have those, so we don't have, it's important to get public health messages right and not to cause confusion, and we don't have that in-house advice. So I would definitely sort of take my lead from our constituent LA authorities on that. But yeah, and then sorry, the second question, I've forgotten it. I started to write it down.
It was just really if there was any update on the Citizens Assembly for climate change in terms of timescales and what the comms strategy was around that.
Yeah, so I mean, we'll be communicating, I guess, generally what we're doing. I think our next challenge is to create the panel of people, which needs to be, the challenge for that is to do that in as representative way as possible, considering we are more than likely to need to do all of that digitally rather than face-to-face. We were hoping to do a mix of face-to-face and digital engagement, but more than likely that will be mostly digital. So that's my kind of broad answer. The actual detail of the timings, I don't have those to hand, but I can definitely get back to you with that, Councillor Shatwell.
Any more questions or comments from committee members? Nope, I can't see anybody, and I'll just, in case somebody does, I'll ask Stuart a couple of questions. So in terms of, I can appreciate and understand that we've got to work in collaboration with our local authorities, and rightfully so, almost defer to their advice in terms of local issues of how we can work in partnership on promoting certain stories. But when you look at other combined authorities, and the one that always comes to mind in people is the Greater Manchester one, I would say us compared to Greater Manchester, yes, they've had several devolution deals by now, but they seem to have a brand and identity of their own, whereas we as a combined authority seem to struggle with a bit of an identity or brand of what we are. We've got the ambitions of how we want to work and things, but when you go out and about, and I'm sure the committee members will know this as well, and people ask you what is the North of Tyne combined authority, and you try to explain to them, and it's not as easy as an identifiable location or geographical area or set of aims or ambitions than when you think of places like Greater Manchester or West of England or West Midlands. And that's partly part of the problem in terms of engagement, that people don't necessarily understand what area we cover, because we've got parts of it that are technically south of the River Tyne as well, and that they don't understand that it's three constituent local authorities, Northumberland, Newcastle, and North Tyneside, working together on a devolution deal to get better value for our residents in terms of projects that if we worked individually and didn't come together, we would never be able to achieve. So almost in our daily lives, when we go out and about, and even within our own local authorities, us as committee members, and this is the same for audit and standards and cabinet, we're almost all ambassadors of the combined authority, trying to portray the combined authority in a positive image, because discussions amongst colleagues happen all the time, and there's quite often, without naming anybody or anything, there's quite often negative connotations towards the combined authority, and we've got a duty and role to try and no, the combined authority does this. This project happened in X, Y, or Z because the North of Tyne Combined Authority promoted it. And I think we need to take a little bit of sometimes front foot approach and take credit for things where credit is rightfully ours, rather than being cast into the sidelines, because we've talked about some fantastic projects, and it's all good and well us talking around a virtual committee table around this, but outside of us and maybe 10, 15, 50, or 50 people, how many people are going to know that things have happened in the region because of the combined authority? And I think that's the part where you've got to struggle, and that's the extra barrier, and engaging with people goes a long way to helping that. But in terms of the engagement, I can understand the citizens assembly, that's almost been going 18 months and delayed because of COVID. But in terms of the mayoral question times, there's a gap between the politics of the combined authority. We're all politicians and we all have our own politics, and his role as I would say, the chief political figure within the authority, going around on what his manifesto pledges were and people engaging with him on those. But there's also how do people directly engage with the combined authority as a corporate entity, not just the mayor? Because I won't ask for your opinion on this, but a while back when we first came together and started, there seemed to be a bit of encouraging discussions behind the scenes that we would move towards maybe having a public question type forum of, do you know how all of our local councils have a public question time for people who submit a question, a week or so in advance, and they could turn up and ask the question and get a written response or get a verbal response there. And there seemed to be quite a lot of, pretty much it was almost going to be that it was going to be on scrutiny committees, that if it wasn't going to be on cabinet, and then at the last minute somebody stamped a thumb down and said, no, we're not doing this, this is not what we're about. So it's a bit of conflicting messaging that we're saying we want to engage with the public, but then when we have proposals and ideas of how about we do that, it seems to be scuppered because there's a fear of the combined authority getting its own identity.
That's a lot of stuff in there. No, and I think we are a partnership body. I think that's the right way to do it. I think the reason why I've got that, we've discussed with cabinet informally, and then also with officers, this concept of getting the basics right. I think making sure that we are doing the basics and presenting ourselves correctly in the right forums, and making sure people are looped into what we're doing will help establish us. And then I think sort of as part of that planning process, to make sure that we know what's coming up, and that we make the most of the work that we have done, and celebrate that, and present that correctly in a timely manner on social media and on our comms channels means that we'll get better recognition for what has actually been achieved. And then I think coming up in the next year, I think you're right. We need to do a bit of sort of looking back and celebrating what has been achieved and already delivered, because there are a number of things that have already been delivered, and people potentially are in work now because of the activity that has been done. So my plan is to look at pulling that together into a sort of cohesive piece of work that councillors who are involved in the combined authority can share and easily use with others to say, look, this is what has been achieved. And then I think broadly speaking, we do have an identity, and I think as we become a more established combined authority, that will grow, but we have got a long way to go on that. I think we have, our highest figure is about 3,000 people following us on Twitter, as far as residents are concerned, and I think that can be higher, and it will be a lot lower than Newcastle City Council's followers, for example. So we have work to do in that area. And I'm happy to talk this through with people as well. I mean, I think it's great coming to talk to you as a committee, but also if people want to talk it through with me and take a bit of time to talk it through, that would be great. I'm up for that. And
just to end a bit more on a positive note there, and I went along with a few members of our committee did as well to the crowdfund North of Tyne event, and considering that we're in the middle of a global pandemic and everything had to be done on a virtual basis, that was a fantastic turnout of engagement from people within our region interested in working with us and engaging with us. And it's just how we build on that platform and keep in communication with those people who've come to us. And I think it's all worthwhile, and I welcome you saying you're prepared to have discussions with any member of the combined authority outside a formal committee on how maybe ideas to help I know it might not be called that, but to help like the comms strategy because we're the people on the ground in our communities, and we know what messaging might work in certain areas that might not work in others. And it's that local knowledge and input that I think needs to be greatly valued, and I'm sure you'll take that on board. And is there any other questions or comments? Councillor Graham?
Apologies, I missed the whole of that presentation due to communication difficulties, which is quite ironic. Just what you're saying, Grigor, about branding, I think it's really important because last week on BBC Breakfast, Louise Minchin said, and soon we will have the Mayor of North Tyneside speaking. And then half an hour later, Jamie Driscoll popped up. So there's this real mismatch between the Mayor of North Tyneside and the elected Mayor of the combined authority. And I think whilst we have that, there is always going to be that confusion. And I do think we need a strong brand to hang on it, with the 3 N's, if you know what I mean. And we need really to work on that and to push out what that brand means for people in our region.
I would agree with that. I think people struggle with the concept of regional mayors versus kind of other elected mayors. That's complicated. And just to reassure, for every media interview, we clearly give a caption to the organisation about it's north of Tyne, and we spell that out every time we're asked on a media for media. So yeah. And can I just add one more point that I thought was quite interesting, just relating back to some of the stuff talked about elsewhere in the meeting. So some glimmers of hope, I guess, is that actually our most popular tweet and bit of social that we've done this year has really been around young people and young. That's great. So we have potentially got a bit of a young person following, which is good. And then the sort of second and third most engaged pieces of social that we've done were actually around rural business and what rural businesses, stuff they could apply for, and also digital inclusion, which again I think are issues that affect the rural regions perhaps more than the city. So I think that's also encouraging that those areas have had we've had a good bit of engagement on those topics.
Any more questions? No, don't see anybody. And just on terms of what I discussed about earlier in the meeting as well, and you just saying what's been the most engaged tweets in the different areas, that's kind of also a reason of why we need to work together across the region and almost get that message out that, well, in fact, it is these areas that are engaging with us the most, these communities, these people, and this is why we've come together to try and help solve some of the long established problems that have historically been by us not working together. And sorry, just totally, I had it there. I think I'll just leave it there, and that it's a fantastic piece of work. I look forward to seeing how this develops and how as an organization and brand we grow and move forward. And hopefully maybe this time next year, the followers on the different social media platforms will be double or tenfold than what we've got now. But and the point that I was going to mention was about the website. Compared to what the website was previously, it was a very clunky, website that didn't really do much. But since the improvements have been done, I would say it's more user friendly. And when you're on it, it makes you want to click on different things, and it's more attractive. And reading the different projects and programs are doing, whereas previously it just seemed to be a plain white page with a whole load of text. But it actually gives a bit of context of the area we represent. So I'll leave it there. And thank you for taking time to speak to Scrutiny.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So now I will move on to item 10, financial planning and budget setting process, which we have Janice Gillespie, our Chief Finance Officer, for this report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the report that I took to Cabinet, which presents basically the process for the authority to approach the setting of the 21-22 budget and updating the financial plan. So it's largely a procedural report that sets out the proposed timetable to deliver the budget and financial plan next financial year. As the key issues at the moment are, obviously we don't know if we will secure any further funding through the recovery and devolution deal that has been put on the table, nor indeed as a result of CSR. But substantially, the assumptions around the budget continue. Clearly, that the authority will continue to get the 20 million per year revenue funding. And we have the adult education budget now. And we know for the next 5 years, we have an allocation for the brownfield land. So they will all be absolutely expressly disclosed in the budget. So it was really for members Cabinet to approve the timetable, which was set out in Appendix A to the Cabinet report. And included in that would be a proposed workshop with this committee early January to consider the proposals. Just one thing I'd like to add, obviously, as part of last year's process, there was some discussion had around engagement as part of this budget setting process. So I will be working with Ruth and her team around how we might approach some public engagement, albeit remotely as part of this process. And obviously we have Stuart on board now as well. So I'll be dialoguing with Stuart around how we can perhaps be a bit more creative on that more generic budget engagement that we might be able to achieve as part of this process. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members on this, or we're just happy to note it because it is just a procedural report and outlining the process for this year?
Notes, Chair, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So we'll move on to item 11, which is the 2019-2020 Norfolk Tyne Combined Authority Outturn Year of End report. And again, we've got Janice for this one.
Okay. It seems like such a long time ago that this report was written. So this was largely setting out the outturn for North of Tyne for 1920 in advance of publication of the draft statement of accounts. I guess the key features of the report are set out on page 132 of the budget of the papers, the committee papers, where you see on table 1 kind of the summary variance position across the investment fund and the corporate budget. And what I would say on the investment fund, obviously it remains challenging to absolutely estimate when cash is going out of the door. But clearly there's been a lot more work done since the year end, certainly into this financial year, around the issuing of grants and the approval of funding to organisations during this year, and we will see, I think, that variation refined over time. Table 2 on page 133 sets out in more detail the variations on the corporate budget. In terms of staffing, I think the main variation there was around the timing of appointments, because really last financial year was our first full year. And we see some additional grants that came into the authority. We had EU exit grant, we had some additional AAB implementation funding, and actually were able to determine and receive a substantial amount of interest receivable that we previously hadn't budgeted. I guess one of the key lines of variations on income is our assumptions around the business rate pilot. So we expect 4.9 million to come into the authority's books once the audit's completed for 1920 of the constituent authorities. So we have an estimated income return there, and continue to work with the authorities in terms of how that would be distributed during this financial year. In terms of table 3 and the investment fund, as I've said, we have managed to issue a range of grants during 1920. So you see there on the work stream lines, close to £750,000 issued. We've probably been a little bit optimistic on how much business case development work was actually going to happen during the financial year, and we'll continue to refine that budget and the technical support budgets as we move through this year and into the future. In terms of reserves, what we did do was maintain the strategic reserve at 200,000, and then any unspent investment fund is effectively held in the reserve, and now we have an accounting pension reserve as part of the statement of accounts. Treasury management, we continue to perform well on treasury management. A tricky environment now, which will come through in further reports. But last year we managed the cash well to earn not an unreasonable amount of investment income despite pretty low interest rates. We did include with the outturn position the figures on the LEP in terms of where they outturned. At the time, that was more for information, because as at the 31st of March, we weren't accountable body for the LEP. So that was more of an information item at that point in time. But Katie and I are here, happy to take any questions on that report.
Any questions from members? No, are members happy to note that? I presume silence is in agreement, but just before we do that, I would just like to say to Janice, it's good to see that in this report you've taken on board what Overview and Scrutiny previously commented on, really in the early days, in terms of within the corporate budget, that we're now described, advisors as being advisors external to the combined authority, when there was public misconception of them being political advisors. Yeah, so that's good to see that. So all happy to note, yeah. So that takes us on to item 12, which is the Q1 budget monitoring report. And again, Janice.
Yeah. So this is the first position report for 2021. So it's based on information up to the end of June and projected forward in terms of where we think the position will outturn. So in terms of, checking on the tables, page 158 of the committee papers, table 1 sets out that corporate position again. Some underspends on the staffing budget, but that's largely as a result of a lower than anticipated pension contribution rate as a result of the LEP transfer into the authority and an approach to minimising overall contribution rates in accordance with the pension valuation. So that's been a positive for the authority. And some variations on SLAs where we continue to review and dialogue with each authority the appropriate contribution in terms of cost of service provision. In terms of the investment programme budget, we have on page 161, table 3 sets out the forecast for this year end. And at that point in time, we probably early in the monitoring cycle, it was looking like, we would have a significant amount of cash going out of the authority in terms of work streams. So around 13.7 million. Bit of an overspend on technical support, but that's largely as a result of some costs that were carried over from 1920, and there is funding set aside associated with that cost. So I think obviously this was back in June. The next monitoring report will go to Cabinet in November with September's position, and you'll see an updated expenditure position there in terms of the investment fund. We've now started to include the adult education budget. The first full year of an adult education budget, and as you would expect, due to the allocations and the procurement activity undertaken, we're largely expecting that budget to spend in line with profile for 2021, and it's a half year for that particular budget. I'm happy to take any questions on the paper.
Any questions from members? Are we happy to note the report? Yeah, I see heads nodding, so I'll take that as a yes, which takes us on to our final item of business, which was numbered as item 8, the North East Local Enterprise Partnership update. And I believe it's Janice given this update as well.
Yes, Chair, I'm just going back to the paper. So being accountable body for the LEP, what we have agreed will happen is a regular update into Cabinet of the various decisions that have been made by the LEP in terms of funding awards. So a paper went through to Cabinet at the end of September, which gave the Cabinet an update on all the awards this financial year since we took over as accountable body. So really there's a whole raft of information there around the range of grants that have been issued. There is then update information around the enterprise zone activity, local growth fund activity, and kind of their approach to COVID-19 and the overall LEP investment programme. So a significant amount of information being provided through to Cabinet. More for information, because clearly the LEP is able to make its own decisions. John Softly and myself attend the LEP board and ensure the probity and financial assurance around the decision making. So this report is largely to inform Cabinet of the decisions that have been made. I'm happy to take questions where I can. Katie's on the line as well, if she may need to help if we have any detailed, complex questions on the funds.
And just as chair, if there's any questions on specifics in relation to the confidential documents that we got as background to this report, I don't want to have to go into the closed session because it's the last item. So would members be consent that for detailed response that they can send an email requests to Janice, and Janice can provide a full, thorough, detailed answer and share it with the committee thereafter. So is there any general questions for Janice in relation to this item? I don't see anybody. So are members happy to note the report? I can see heads nodding. So I take that as agreement. So we'll move on to the last item, which is item 13, date and time of the next meeting. So the next scheduled meeting for this committee is the 8th of December 2020 at 10 a.m. And obviously, if it's circumstances changing between now and it's required that we need to have an extraordinary meeting, we would schedule that and get in communication for best times and dates for people then. And thank you for your attendance to this committee today. And for anybody who's still watching this, thank you for taking an interest in the North of Tyne Combined Authority.